said this, for those that are new here, this is part of a series of webinars that we are hosting in the onHeat project. And this is part of a training program we are developing. We already had 2 past editions of this training program where we focused on the early stages of heating and cooling planning in municipalities, and we introduced the hot maps tool. So if you are interested, please go check our website. You will be able to find the recordings and slides for those webinars. And now the topic for today is moving from planning to rollout and identifying heating and cooling measures in Europe. So as you can see here, we will have 3 speakers today. We will start with Ali Aydemir from Fraunhofer EC. He will introduce the topic and explain the measures and policy framework for heating and cooling in Europe. Then we will have Johannes Jacobi Pedersen from the supply company Hillerhold, and he will explain the Danish context in identifying the measures in the local context for Denmark. And for explaining the German context, we will have Valentin Fried from DENA, the German Energy Agency. Yeah, and finally, we will have an open question and answer session. So if you have any questions during the webinar, you can post them in the chat, or you can just raise your hands later in this Q&A session. And just to give you a very brief introduction to the topic, you can see here a diagram, which is actually a workflow that we developed as part of the onHeat project, where we show the different steps we can take for heating and cooling planning in municipalities, all the way from vision and commitment to project implementation and upscaling. So the step we have after heating and cooling transition strategy, so after we have built our heating and cooling plan, is defining policies and measures. So this step aims to underpin the heating and cooling strategy that was developed with appropriate measures for it. For example, if we have a strategic goal of increasing the renovation rate by 10% by 2030, then in this step we have to find which measures will help us achieve this goal and which policy framework we have that will enable us reach our objectives. But I'm sure that Ali will much better explain this. Ali is the researcher and project manager in the Competence Center for Energy Technologies and Energy Systems at Fraunhofer EC Institute. His research areas include the assessment of technologies to improve energy efficiency or reduce greenhouse gas emissions, also focusing on heating planning, and he is actually coordinating the onHeat project. So Ali, I give you the floor to explain the measures and policy framework for heating and cooling in Europe. I'll let you share your screen.
Okay, yeah, first of all, thank you, Julian, for the kind introduction. Also, dear participants, I'm happy to introduce, to welcome you to our webinar today. And I have a quite, intro for you, which is not so into deep. So I will give you a brief overview on EU policies with regard to heating and cooling, just to set the scene a bit. That's what I brought with me today. And afterwards, we will have 2 more into deep topics, and then let's see what the discussion will bring. So as the title is Policy Framework for Heating and Cooling, I prepared a slide for you to just briefly introduce what policies means overall, and how we are thinking when we talk and discuss and analyze policies. So basically, policies is like not only limited to politics, and that's what's very often mixed up. Policies also apply for businesses and other groups of organizations. And in general, it's like you have a set of ideas or a plan, and you want to achieve a particular goal. And that's where you design policies for to achieve this goal. So very common known ranges to apply policies by states are, for example, to ensure public safety or promote economic development. But for sure as well to protect the environment, and that's why we are today here. We are talking about heating and cooling planning later on, and also with the aim to improve sustainability of heating and cooling across Europe. And usually you can differentiate policies or elements of policies by three types of motivation. So we have the classic stick, is for example when you look at EU policies, the eco-design regulation, for example, regulating the market for specific products, for example, lighting. Then you have the tambourine, which is more on information. And then you as well have carrots, like giving incentives, for example, subsidies for specific tasks. And what we will see is that heating and cooling planning, as it is at least planned in several European states, has elements of all the three tenets of motivation. So let's come back to European policy design. So as most of you are probably aware of, we have the Green Deal, we have targets to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And what I sketched here, inspired by Kropp et al., is a political house of climate protection. And we see we have specific goals, and below the specific goals, we have policy instruments implemented in the form of directives. And this directive has to be implemented in national law. So overall, we want to reduce emissions by more than 50% by 2030. And one very important pillar of this is the renovation wave. So we are going, or the plan is to double the annual energy renovation rate by 2030. And you can find also a renovation strategy on that, consisting on three pillars. So you will have aspects covering energy poverty, but as well the renovation of public buildings, which is covered by the revised Energy Efficiency Directive, very intensive, but as well strategies on heating and cooling decarbonization. And what I'm going to show you in the next slides right on is I picked up some heating and cooling relevant aspects from each of the directives to set the scene, introduce you to the topic, and in the end I will close with the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is most relevant for heating and cooling planning. How does it started, or since when is heating and cooling on the agenda, also on European level? So I would say it has a longer history than going back to 2060. But 2060 was, the first year where you had at least a strategy drafted on EU level. So it was like a first year where we had an overview of the energy consumption and the fuel mix on heating and cooling and on heating and cooling consumption. And it's clear since decades that you will have no decarbonized energy system without decarbonizing heating and cooling, which is like roundabout responsible for nearly half of the European energy demand. Then this had been like complemented with measures by the first clean energy package in 2019, and you will also find like accompanying studies. So if you go, for example, on the website on the heating and cooling strategy, on how or which possibilities do we have to decarbonize heating and cooling across Europe. So there are system studies using scenario modeling technique, and I picked up three here for further literature. If you are interested in the topic, you can download it and have a more in-depth view. And then one very important pillar, which maybe will have some effect on decarbonizing heating and cooling across Europe, will be the emission trading system, which will be expanded also to buildings and road transport. So the decision has been made last year by revising or at least announcing to introduce the ETS2. In 25, the first practical operational steps will start. So there will be it will be required to monitor and report emissions also coming from the building sector. And then in 27, the ETS2 should be operational, which means there will be a trading system also for emissions coming from the building sector as well. With regard to the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, the EPBD, we have kind of like a provisional agreement from the last year. Here, the idea is to reduce primary energy use of residential buildings quite substantially by 35. We also have goals already announced. And what's very interesting here is that the major share of this decrease should come from the worst performing buildings. So there's a debate ongoing on how to use energy labeling to achieve this goal. And the member states will also have to establish national building renovation plans. And yeah, this is for sure a very central pillar also to decarbonize heating and cooling, because when you reduce the consumption, you also have to decarbonize less energy provision. Then we have the Renewable Energy Directive. So overall, like promoting the use of more clean or sustainable energy in the system. We also have goals here, which is quite substantial. So the share of renewables in final energy consumption should be more than 40% across Europe in 2030. That's the goal of the directive. And you have also more specific goals on heating and cooling. So we talk about an annual increase of 0.8% renewable heating cooling for the next years until 25. And afterwards, this will be increased slightly to 1.1%. So we have here a figure on renewable heating and cooling shares across European countries. You see, we have overall a share of 25%. There are countries with higher shares, for example, like Sweden, which is nearly using 70% renewables for heating and cooling, and as well countries with lower shares, like, for example, Germany is a country I came from, where we use a lot of natural gas. Anyhow, this might be explained by different reasons. For example, Nordic countries have a longer history in heating planning. They also use more district heating. But for example, for the case of Sweden, also the share of biomass, because potential are there higher compared to Germany, is quite higher. And then I also brought a slide on the Energy Efficiency Directive with me, which is a bit mixed up here. I'm not sure, Julian, I'm searching it right now. It's here. Yeah, okay. And then with regard to fuel mix on heating and cooling, I brought a slide for you, which is from a scientific paper from Braungart et al. And here you see it's an analysis on existing regulation to phase out fossil fuel, because it's clear when we want to change the system, we have to start with phasing out the fossil fuel at some point. And you see several countries are already or have already implemented measures. For example, in Germany, we last year debated very intensively on phasing out natural gas. And last but not least, very central for heating and cooling planning, we have the Energy Efficiency Directive. Here we have also like increased reduction goals on energy consumption, energy saving obligations. Very interesting with regard to heating and cooling is also Article 12 on data centers, which at least requires operators of large data centers to provide data. Which is very interesting, for example, also on analyzing potentials on excess heat. For example, then also like as an energy source for district heating, for example, and this is also relevant for heating and cooling planning then. And then in Article 25, Section 6, we have a requirement on local heating and cooling plants. So by the directive, member states are right now responsible to somehow create a legal framework for heating and cooling planning that ensures that these plans are prepared for municipalities with populations higher than 45,000, and it's quite comprehensive what's written in there, because you have requirements also on how you do such heating and cooling planning. For example, you have to be compliant with the energy efficiency first principle, but it's not only on technical planning. It's also important to involve regional and local stakeholders to make things happen, because it's very crucial. And you need to also describe some kind of a trajectory, how you are going to achieve goals consistent or at least in line with climate neutrality. And in the end, this should be backed up by the national or member states, which should help with recommendations, support actions, etc. So in Germany, for example, we have a competence center on heating and cooling planning. I think they will also have a presentation later on. And we in onHeat, we started several years ago, at least to pushing a bit the methodologies with regard to this area, but as well training municipalities with regards to usage of tools for heating and cooling planning. What you can see here, the areas on the rise in Europe. There are like websites or institutes, for example, energy cities, like observing these areas. You can have a look on this website, for example. I wouldn't interpret these colors too strong, because they give ratings on the overall assessment legal framework or support framework with regard to heating and cooling planning for European countries. So it's a bit hard to interpret, but what's very interesting there is when you go on the website is you have also like country assessments. So for each of the countries analyzed, you see what's happening. So it gives you a good overview, and that's why I brought this map with me, not to like judge or anything in the direction to say, okay, this country is performing good, this worse, because it can be quite controversial with regard to methodologies to assess this. And that's it. I would say thank you for your attention, and I'm free for questions, maybe a quick one, and would pass over then.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you very much. So I will encourage the audience to post any questions they have in the chat, and then we can answer them later before the closing. And so thank you for presenting us, which is the European context. This is the highest level policy framework we have here in Europe. And now the question is what happens when we go to a more national or local context. And for that, we have here Johannes Jacobi Pedersen, who will share which is the Danish context from his perspective. He's a civil engineer with a focus on energy planning, with over 16 years of experience. And he has been the last 4 years working in the heat supply company of Hillerød in Denmark. So, Johannes, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me here. I wasn't really sure what abstraction level I should choose for this. I chose something down the middle, and I hope it's precise enough to shoot. As you just said, Julian, my name is Johannes Jacobi Pedersen. I have 15 years of experience in this field, and I work for a utility company here in Denmark that is presently planning to build some new district heating systems separate from the ones we already have. And I'm going a bit through like the framework we have for how to do this, and also like some of the things we are doing to make it a success. Just to give you a context at how big we are, in the Danish context, we are mid-sized. The municipality that owns us have 75,000 inhabitants, and 3/4 of those have district heating. The company itself has around 35 employees working with district heating. We are a multi-utility company, so we have more than 200 in total, but this is the ones who work only with district heating. We have energy users around 360,000 megawatt hours a year, and we have around 8,000 customers, which is everything from a single detached house to big industries and complexes. So first off, I don't know where people are from, and in some countries, district heating is already an integrated part. In some countries, it's almost non-existent. And if you're building from scratch, or if you already have a district company or an infrastructure, it's two very, very different things. And I'm talking from a perspective, also what was on the last slide before from the other speaker, like in Denmark, we have a pretty good framework for it. Most cities already have district heating. So we have a lot of framework for what we are doing. We don't have to invent a lot of new things. The reason why we are building out to like the smaller towns around us is because the Danish government, under the oil and gas crisis, told us to limit the space heating from natural gas and oil. And even though it's not by law, because we are municipality owned, our owners kind of told us that this is also what we're going to do. And it's either us or heat pumps, and heat pumps are selling in a bit different way than we are. So it's kind of a race against time if we want to do anything in these smaller cities. So I'm going through three things. First, just to give you context about what are the frameworks that we are operating under and how they determine what we can and cannot do. And then I'll end up talking a bit about what we are actually doing at the moment. And it's going to be on a pretty broad level. I'm not going down into the details because 10 minutes is simply not enough time to more than just scratch. So if you have any questions, I can go a bit deeper on that. The main stakeholders, they're the things that determine what we do and we don't do, are the lawgivers, it's the owners, it's the customers, and it's the culture we already have. And together they kind of give us a space where we can operate within. The legal framework is that as a utility company, we are called a natural monopoly. It means that there are no competitive hot water pipes going in the city we are in. We are the only ones that supply district heating. And as such, in Denmark, it means that you are not for profit. And that means that we are very secure as a position as a company, because whether or not we have bigger or smaller income stream, we can always go to our customers and get what we need to make it a zero sum. And not to use that to our advantage, we can only do things that have been approved by a project proposal and shows that this is the best for society. So we can't use money on things that are not our main business, and we can't start projects that hasn't been approved to be better for society and for our customers. There are three ways you can have a district heating system in Denmark. It can be municipality owned, consumer owned, or it can be privately owned. And privately owned is almost non-existent, but they are there. And at least like the consumers have freedom of choice. We have to be competitive against other ways of heating a house. And if they find other ways better, they can always change. We, on the other hand, have to supply. If something is our area, we have to give district heating if they want it. The owners, they have many demands for us. The ones that give most sense in this aspect is the fact that we have to be fossil fuel free by 2030, and we are getting closer to that in the next few years. And then we also have to help eliminate all the oil and natural gas consumption in the smaller cities in Hilo by 2035. And the goal by the government 2 years ago was basically to do it before 2029. The customers, of course, they also have a green agenda, but if you don't have price stability, if you don't have security of supply, and if you don't have competitive pricing, it doesn't really matter, because like you have to, like if the price goes up and down extremely much each year, people can't really put a budget in for you. And if you can't make sure that you have heating when they want it, then they can't really depend on you. And the same with like if other means of production for heating at locally in the houses are cheaper, then they will escape us. So we have like a pretty tight framework here that, yeah, we can do green if those things are still maintained on a very securely level. And finally, the company culture, and this is not just in my utility companies, it's basically how it is abroad, the whole Danish context, that in general, people don't think about the utilities they have unless they're not there. And that means that we kind of live a bit in the shadows, have a very low risk profile, because people don't thank us for saving 2 kroner on the bill, but they do definitely not thank us if something goes wrong. We are also, because of this, quite conservative. And because of the whole approval process, we can't, like, we have to, everything we change, we have to get approved. It's kind of a slow and steady change. So like a change like 2 years ago when the oil and natural gas suddenly quadrupled, 10 doubled, like this is something, it's a bit difficult to change with fast. We have a competitive price, but we are not a company who think about how to outcompete other means of production heat. Like we are living our life, and if people want district heating, they come to us. And this is changing a bit now, but we don't come from a very competitive mode where we have a very extreme sales department who runs around trying to sell hardcore to everybody. And finally, we have a pride in our project. We have a pretty high standard for what we're doing. We often have like double production of what we need. We have a very safe way of maintaining the pipes so that it's not running one day away from collapsing every day. And this is kind of the same slide as before, just to catch back to like, so we have a lot of framework. We're not like operating in a void. It's in that way, as long as we can find a space where all these things overlap, it's pretty easy to put up a district heating system. And because we have to like go out and find these small towns around us, it's not the most straightforward projects economically, but they are there, and we are kind of trying to figure it out. And our municipality, together with us, kind of made this map. And the blue, I don't know how clear this is, but this is my municipality, and the blue areas are the bigger cities, and they are all covered by district heating. And the green ones are all the small settlements, towns, depending on how big your country is. They are from a few hundred to almost 10,000 people. And we're trying to find ways to extend district heating to them. And it's kind of a risk assessment to some degrees. The project proposals has been approved, but they kind of assert that you have to have 60% of the potential customers in the city has to sign a contract that they are willing to get district heating. But the economy doesn't necessarily, it's not stable with 60%. You might have to have 70 or 80% over time. So there's a risk factor in between those two numbers. And this is kind of where our owners is like pushing us down a way that doesn't necessarily is the best economical solution, but it's the best for the municipality as such, because the more people have district heating, the less insecure supply is for the customers, and then generally the price will go down. The most difficult part for the islands, and I don't want to tell you which ones are, but there are 3 of these that are going to be like individual islands. It's not going to be connected to the existing system, and finding facilities for them and actually figuring out how to be allowed to build a heat pump or put up a big water tank for storage of hot water for high peak hours. That's really difficult, because the people who want district heating, they don't want the production facilities around them. They also don't want you to dig up their roads, even if it's just for a short while. So they're kind of your customers and your worst enemy at the same time when you're going through this, because they have very many opinions about the interruptions you have on the way. And then finally, like when you're actually talking to these people, you have to do a lot of things simultaneously. So if you are in a system where you haven't been building out very fast because you've been slow and steady, and suddenly you have to maybe getting 50% more customers, not volume wise, but just by customers, you have to suddenly build up a capacity to deal with so many people writing you and calling you and putting them through the system and making sure that they have their billing coming in. You also have to make very competitive prices with these people that doesn't really cost harm to the existing customers. So you have to like communicate those things both to the existing customers and to the new customers. At the same time, you have to prepare physically for how do you actually go out and where is this pipe going to go, and how do we close down this road and make sure that the traffic can go around it and that people can go to and from work. And that there's a lot of things that still make it very complicated, but at least we kind of have, like, we understand what is to be done, but it's a lot of moving parts to still make it work, even when we have the background we have. And that was my presentation.
Thank you very much, Johannes, for sharing the context in Finland and Denmark. And we actually have a question, so I think we can maybe answer it right away. Valentin is asking if the heat planning is responsibility of the municipality or actually of the heating supplier.
You can kind of say it's both. Like if we propose a change, we make the project proposal, and in reality, other people can make them too. And then you send them to the municipality, and the municipality have to go through them and approve them according to the standards. And when they approve it, we are given a permission to start using money on this. So you can say like the actual planning is done at the municipality, but the proposals are done by us. And the municipality have to make sure that it's always the best alternative that is going to be made. So we could propose a new production facility, but if the municipality think that something is better, they can ask us to look into that instead. So it's kind of in both ways.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Then I think we can move on to the next presentation, which will be about the context we have in Germany, the policy framework in Germany. And for that, we have Valentin Fried. He's an expert on renewable heat at the German Energy Agency, DENA. And yeah, he's committed to shaping the future of the energy supply in Germany and internationally. So, Valentin, I see you can share your screen, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julian. I just arranged my screens and then we jump into the presentation. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. I don't need to introduce myself anymore. In this presentation, I want to quickly introduce to you the Ready for Heat project, because I think it's going very well hand in hand with the Action Heat project we've just heard about. But then quickly also go from the European context shortly into the German context and then into the perspective on the local level. The Ready for Heat project examines the transposition of the EU regulations we've just heard about, and it's a project that runs for 3 years. We have more or less half time right now, and there are 11 partners from 8 different countries involved. And the focus is on supporting the implementation of the Renewable Energy Directive. We've also just heard in the previous presentation, and support implementation on multiple levels, member state level, policymakers, but also the local stakeholders in the expansion of renewable heat and cold. And this is happening by identifying and disseminating appropriate sets of instruments. And I'll also give you a link at the end of the presentation if you want to follow up on that. If you look at Germany, we have already seen a sneak peek in the first presentation. We have more than half of our energy consumption related to heat and cold, where cold doesn't really play a big role, so most of it is heat. And we are very good already in having renewable energies in the electricity consumption, but in heat we are using still about 80% by fossil fuels. And Germany aims at 50% climate neutral heat by 2030 and climate neutrality by 2045, also within the frameworks of the EU, given a bit above the targets. And therefore, already a number of policies and policy measures have been taken. There's a number of, but I want to focus now on the 2 funding pots. The first one is directly targeted to low emission heating networks. And yeah, so it's going to the municipalities and heating suppliers who are building up infrastructure. And the second pot is for efficient buildings. Also, this can be directly translated from the EU regulations on efficient buildings we have heard about before. And it supports measures to improve energy efficiency in buildings and the replacement of old fossil heating systems with heating based on renewable energy sources. And for house owners, it's very important when they have to make a decision in what technology to invest, to know about their prospective options. So whether there will be a district heating network in their street or not, to narrow it down. And there comes the Wärmeplanungsgesetz into play, a beautiful name for the municipal heat planning. It's very recent. It's effective since the beginning of the year, and it says that municipalities, the big ones, have to conduct a municipal heat planning until summer 26, and the not so big ones until summer 28, and show a path how the heat consumption can be cost efficient, sustainable, economical, affordable, and also resilient. So it must be reliable and greenhouse gas neutral by 45. And it has to divide the ground of the municipality in different areas. Where will be a heating grid? Where will be no heating grid? Also, hydrogen grid areas are allowed, but we've heard also that it must be economical feasible. So we see here the example of the city Heidelberg. They have the green areas, dark green and bright green both mean district heating. The red means the smaller district heating, in German Nahwärme grids, and the other colors, blue and yellow, mean different kinds of decentral heating systems which are foreseen in that area. And they don't foresee hydrogen, which is probably smart. Yeah, the heat planning is not entirely new because there are already 2 federal states who have started it earlier. But as of last October, we had between 600 and 700 municipalities working on the heat planning, and that means that 10,000 municipalities still have to start action on that topic. And now I want to dive into the different steps of the municipal heat planning, which will probably sound very familiar to our previous speaker. Yeah, and I hope the examples help you to get a better picture. The first step is the stock analysis. We're just having a look in what are the local circumstances, but what is our starting point. This example is from the city of Gingen, which has already completed their first round of the planning. And on the left side, we have the energy density consumed per street section. So we need how much energy is consumed nowadays in the different areas. And on the right side, we see on what energy source the districts are relying at the moment. So in the example, it's mostly gas, a little bit of oil, and the orange parts is small heating grids, which are already existing there. The second step is the potential evaluation, and we just analyze all possible potentials for achieving a high proportion of local energy sources, green local energy sources. And we have also heard in the previous presentation, energy efficiency first. So on this picture, we see the energy saving potentials through modernization of the residential buildings. But we also evaluate all the other potentials at the place. So these can be solar, also geothermal potentials, biomass and biogas. And it's important to look that these potentials are not concurring with higher cases for usage of the biomass. So we are not taking good wood and burn it if we can build furniture or houses with it. And it must be regional because there will be a lot of requests for this energy source because it's easy convertible to nowadays infrastructures. Exactly. So biomass and biogas is limited in the German regulations. And also we look at our water bodies, rivers and lakes for using maybe big central heat pumps and waste heat emitters in our region. I want to stick to the example of geothermal energy for the next slide, because it's special that it has high investment needed in the early phases of projects. And here we can also see why this is the case. First, you need to scan the ground with these big vibro trucks, which are really shaking the ground. And then by the reflection of the vibrations, they can more or less guess where there's potentials. But still, we need test drilling and have the exploration risk that we don't find enough hot floating water bodies. So when we're talking about finding the potentials, we also have a look if we can maybe, if we have potentials to reduce the risk for investors. For example, is there insurances for securing these exploration risk, or is there the possibility of additional financing sources, which I come back to later. So if we have evaluated all our potentials, we can develop or translate them into scenarios. We are back at the example of the city of Gingen. On the right picture, you see different colors for different sectors. And the blue zones are foreseen decentral heating, so there's no heating grid planned. And the orange means in the short term, there will be an offer for district heating, and the green that there will be district heating, but a bit later. And on the picture left, we have now for each of these districts different generation scenarios, and these scenarios are directly also involved with different costs. And this is not easy to be estimated when you don't go into the detailed planning, but have to assume so many different ways of producing your renewable heat. Then it's high efforts, and the German government is planning within the next couple of weeks to provide a catalog with technology data and give also some estimations for the different technologies and the related costs. But still, like, costs are very different. Local circumstances are very different from one place to the other. So this can only be an indicator. And I'm very happy that we have a speaker from Denmark, because in the whole process developing the municipal heat planning law and the additional supporting materials and the catalog I was just talking about, we got a lot of support from the Danish experience and the Danish Energy Agency as well. So we can rely on the expertise. So we've seen now the scenarios, and the next step would be just to go into the detailed planning and pick the different form of supply. But the whole process also requires the involvement of multiple actors. So in the law, they are also named, but not all of them are like mandatory. There are a few mandatory ones, the official ones, the potential energy suppliers and heating grid operators must be actively involved, but also the public has to be informed at all times, and also those with justified interest. But there's also the optional involvement, and I brought just a few examples. Emitters of heat and producers of gas can be involved, or large consumers of gas and heat can also participate in the planning process, and also the citizens and the energy communities. And there's a special article in the heat planning law that municipalities with more than 45,000 inhabitants must evaluate the potential contribution of energy communities. And yeah, I think the citizens are always a relevant actor, also like described in the previous presentation, because in the end they have to pay the bills. There is this monopoly which was described, and the support must be there from citizens. And there's another advantage of involving them, because if we get their approval and they standing behind the project, they might even be interested to invest, and other way around, when they want to invest their money or already invested their money, they are standing behind the project. So citizens should be taken into account from the very beginning. Yeah, here's an overview over the whole process, and we see it's iterative. So the municipality works as a facilitator here for the exchange, brings together the relevant actors, and oversees the heat planning process, which is usually conducted by subcontractors or the regional heat provider himself. And it's an iterative process. That means it must be at least revised every 5 years. So I am not exactly sure how good I'm in time, but I'm done. And here's the promised link for the Ready for Heat website, where you will find more support tools, information coming up within the next 1.5 years for those involved in making policies or even involved in the regional heat planning process, and also my contact address if you want to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentin. Thank you for sharing the German context. Very interesting. And we actually have already a question in the chat for you. So I'll directly read it. Here, Maun is asking if the German Energy Agency, if DENA is assisting the municipalities with these heating and cooling strategies, and if so, how does this work? Or I don't know, are you providing any support to this?
Yeah, there is support. It's also related to the German Energy Agency, but it's a competence center located in Halle. It's called KWW, Kompetenzzentrum Kommunale Wärmewende, and if you Google for KWW Halle, you will find all the details about the support for the municipalities. It's originating in the work of DENA, and it's still related, but they are the first go-to place for the municipalities.
Thank you. We have another question, but maybe before I would like to do a question for Johannes also. Johannes, Valentin explained that in Germany, the heating and cooling legislation comes from the federal states. So each federal state is setting different objectives for the municipalities to establish heating and cooling planning. I don't know if in Denmark there's a national regulation which makes it compulsory for municipalities to have heating and cooling planning in place, or if it's coming from each municipality in a different way. Which is the context here?
It's been changing over the years. Like under the energy crisis, every municipality had to make a heat plan for where district heating and where heat pumps were going to be introduced in the coming years. There's also been some inter-municipality heat plans in the years before. We're trying to, instead of looking inwards, we're trying to a bit more outwards and looking between to see synergies. But the plans don't really directly correlate to change, because it's only through the project proposals that change is happening. So the plans are more like trying to give a broader perspective of what could happen, and it's a way to maybe make the municipalities look in a different direction than they would otherwise. So that's not this link between what they say there is actually having any impact on what we end up doing necessarily. Of course, if it's done together, we agree on the goals.
Thank you. And actually, for Valentin, Karsten Sogar is also interested why biomass is not a priority in Germany for heating and cooling. I don't know if you have any insights into this. And he also would like to see your contact details again. Maybe we can just share them in the chat.
There was a short break in my connection, but I think the first question was about biomass. Yeah, it's just that the land of Germany compared to the amount of citizens is little, and we had times where the forests were very strong and had a very high output, but all our different sources for biomass are more or less now at a level where they break even. If we take out more, then we would reduce our stock, and also like growing biomass on the fields is concurring with many other use cases. And right now every municipality wants to get renewable heat as easy as possible, and biomass is the first go-to option for everyone. So there will be a much higher demand than there is supply. So biomass is part of the whole calculation, but it must be very, very restrictive for the planning.
Okay, thank you, Valentin. Then maybe I would also like to make a question for Ali, and then maybe we'll have to end. But Ali, you mentioned that the countries in Northern Europe especially are very advanced with heating and cooling planning, and they have this, they are adopting the European legislation and measures, but maybe this is not seen as much in Southern Northern Europe, maybe because also the climate conditions are different. But for me, a very interesting topic is also cooling planning, because even if we don't have so much heating planning needed because of the climate conditions, maybe cooling is gaining more and more importance. I imagine, I don't know if there are any directions taken from a European context on this regard, for example.
Oh, yeah, good question, actually. I mean, there are some projects. I can give you maybe contact from a colleague, also Horizon projects working on assessing the stock and demands for cooling. So it's also like a bit basic right now. With regard to legislation, actually, I'm not sure. I did not check the directives yesterday with regard to cooling. But what should be kept in mind that it's not always so smart to differentiate cooling and heating, because let's imagine in Germany there was a big fight on heat pumps last year, whether it's a feasible and a good option to transform our heating system. But actually, if you have an air-to-air heat pump, you can cool and heat. So it's the same device, fulfilling both requirements to decarbonize heating and cooling. I'm not sure if it's a national legislation covered this way. Maybe it's a bit, we have a gap here, but it's not always good to separate these topics. Would be my guess.
Thank you.
I can give you the from Europe, from Simon Pizzuto is his name. Gives the contact, And I think there are some projects also like, dealing with the topic. How will the cooling demand rise? So what do they expect? What is the stock of cooling devices, and so on? And I'm not sure if it's so smart to treat it too separately right now, because the technical devices might be similar to solve the solution.
Yeah, of course, makes sense. We will have to look into the development of these technologies, but very interesting, definitely.
I think Carsten also want to add anything.
Yes, there's a complicated project, indeed. Carsten, I know you had some. You're muted, actually. Sorry.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. Yeah, no, what I specifically was addressing And biomass is a complicated thing. It's very diverse and contains many different aspects. What I in particular was focusing on is a food, non-competing food biomass, which is the derivatives from grain, as an example. And Germany is the second largest producer of that in EU. France is superseding it by an inch. But the quantities of agro biomass waste from the German agricultural industry is astronomical. It is so huge that it could, if you look at it academically, could heat, even if you build it as combined heat and power plants, you could cover maybe 8% of the German coal power capacity, and around the same quantity. I wouldn't know exactly what the heat demand is in Germany, but it could maybe cover like 4 million households, which is a significant number. If you look at it academically, of course, you cannot extract all of it. There are many things you can't do, but if you could just use 50% of it or 25%, it is still a very, very significant number. And it seems to me that no one really even has the thought in Germany about it.
There's always a political discussion on if the regulations in Germany are really technology open and friendly to all new possible innovations. And after the experience with the discussions around the heat pump, which has been not very, which brought the current government into many problems with explaining their politics, they are trying to be as neutral as possible, but still getting to their goal. So they have, I don't know if in the legislation itself there is strict numbers on how much biomass is allowed to be used, but in the funding pots, they are saying you're only getting funding if your heat planning is limiting the biomass to, I don't know, 65% or something.
65% is a significant number. It's a big number.
Yeah, exactly. But especially the small municipalities, they only want to put one method of heat supply into place, and it must be very reliable. And they all want to use biomass because it's so easy to use and so easy to regulate. So yeah, that's the background and why I was emphasizing that biomass is not the one solution for all the problems.
No, there's no single solution for any problem. It's a combination of several solutions. The plant here behind me is a straw-fired combined heat and power plant in UK. There are several of them in Denmark, and it's a very viable, reliable, consistent fuel that can do a very predictable job in Germany as well, considering the immense resources there is.
Thank you. Sorry, I think we have to close today, but if you want to, of course, continue the conversations by email.
I would like to have your contacts again, Valentin.
I'm tapping it right now into the chat.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I can also share the contact, of course, by email. But I will just share my screen one last time to tell you about our next webinar opportunities before we close today. So as you can see here, we have a second active heat training session upcoming on the 4th of April. So if you didn't already sign for this, I encourage you to do so. This will focus on designing district heating and cooling networks with the tool, the Thermos tool, and you will be able to get certified with a short exercise. So if you're interested, please just come. And also, you can check our website for further opportunities. For example, the Active Heat Support Facility. We are currently on the process of supporting 120 municipalities with their heating and cooling strategies. So if this sounds interesting, please also visit our website. And having said that, I just would like to thank you all for being here. We will soon make available the recording and the slides of today. We will send them to you by email. And that's it. Have a good evening and thank you very much.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.